Welcome to the Dollars and Hops podcast, where we help you optimize your financial future. Here are your hosts, Scott and Lance.
Welcome back to the Dollars and Hops podcast. My name is Lance, your host. Thanks for joining us. I have alongside with me my co-host, Scott, up in Maryland, the great state of Maryland, as we're approaching election time. Scott, how are things up there in the Chesapeake area?
Everything's great, Lance. I'm excited to get into this episode and talk about credit cards and kind of our thoughts about credit cards as part of your financial plan and where they fit in. There's a lot of dangers and pitfalls that come along with credit cards, but at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of things that people can take away from this episode to better their personal finances. But before we get to that, Lance, what are you sipping on today?
Yeah, so I'm keeping it local. I've got, we're working out of Free House Brewery up in North Charleston, South Carolina, which is just up the road from where I live. And this is going to be their Green Door IPA. So bringing it on back to the good old IPAs, a nice safe place for me as a craft beer connoisseur that I am. Scott, how about you? What do you got? What do you got tonight?
Yeah, so I'm also staying in the IPA world. I'll be sipping on a beer from Monument City Brewing Company out of Baltimore, Maryland, very close to where I live. It's called a 51 Rye, and it's a rye indie pale ale. So excited to get into this one.
Very cool. Yeah, I enjoy good rye as well. It sounds delicious. Yeah, before we kind of jump into our headline of the week, it's just important to say, like, I think with credit cards, this is going to be a fun episode. There's a lot of interesting opinions about credit cards. They seem to be kind of a divisive subject for many people, but excited to kind of, take a look at your opinions on them and mine as well, knowing how we've dealt with our finances over the years and some strategies we've kind of developed that have been winning strategies for us. And we definitely want to share those. But I think, Scott, you've got a headline before we go into credit cards. What's our headline this week?
Yeah, so if you're listening to this right now, it's either right before the election or maybe the day of the election or maybe right after the election. So this headline reads, 3 reasons that stocks will probably rise no matter who wins the presidential election. I don't know a whole lot of things about politics, but I do know that about 50% of the people after election day will probably be upset, and the other 50% of people will probably be happy. So with elections as close as they are, I think people have the mindset of, well, if my candidate doesn't win, the world's going to end. So this article was pretty interesting. I mean, they kind of went through different technology sectors and why, they think that the market will rise under each, regardless of who wins the election. But I dug into this a little bit deeper and come to find out under Republican presidents, the stock market tends to go up about 10.8% per year since 1976. And under Democratic presidents, the stock market goes up about 14% per year. So I guess at the end of the day, I think a lot of us will get a little bit too wrapped up into the whole politics thing as it pertains to our personal finances and our investments. Regardless of who wins, chances are stock market's going to go up. And that's because of the innovative nature of all of the companies that make up the S&P 500 and all the the companies that are in the market. So, we're an incredibly agile group of people. We find ways to make money in all sorts of different economies. So at the end of the day, don't get too wrapped up.
And ultimately add value.
Absolutely. Adding value at the end of the day is what's going to drive shareholder profits. And that's what's going to drive stock prices. So I thought that this was pretty interesting and kind of a good thing to talk about here right before or after the election, depending on when you're listening to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to point out, you may have a down year, no matter who's in the Oval Office. There might be a year that the stock market actually goes down a few percentage points or more. But what we're talking about, if you listen to our last episode on why index funds as your main investing vehicle for the long term, when we're talking about longer periods of time, talking about 5 to 10 years or multiple decades, historically, the stock market in general has just outperformed any really other type of investment you could really think of outside of just crazy speculation and getting lucky with a one-off. So that's kind of why we still believe in the United States stock market in general, no matter who's in the Oval Office.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, let's get into the main topic, Lance. We're going to be talking about credit cards. And I think this is
Dun, dun,
dun,
dun.
dun, dun. This is interesting because I think that there's sort of two different mindsets when it comes to credit cards. You have people that are like, oh boy, I better cut up all my credit cards because they get me in trouble.
Right.
And then there's people that utilize credit cards for all of the advantages that they can provide somebody. So I think there's kind of two different camps. And I think the best way to start talking about this is really who should be and who should not be, more importantly, who should not be utilizing credit cards. Who would that be, Lance?
Yeah, this is something where you really do have to be honest with yourself. And if you're not, you're going to find that you could end up in a position where you're in a lot of pain and paying a lot of fees and a lot of high interest debt due to a lack of discipline or a lack of planning or a lack of organization or even lazy. It could be laziness. It could be impulsiveness. There's just so many traps that can, as Americans, we tend to fall into more so than other countries.
Yeah. So I saw like this thing online and it was like talking about how if somebody goes into a store with only a credit card, they're much more likely to spend a higher dollar amount than if they just walk in with cash. So I find that interesting. You just said discipline.
Right.
I think that that's so important when it comes to credit cards. The credit card itself should not change the behavior. If it does, then it's probably a bad thing for you. So you need to ask yourself that and be honest with yourself about it.
Right. There's, as you mentioned, there's multiple studies out there. You guys can go look them up, but on studying the disassociation of between plastic and cold hard cash. So when we actually pay for something with cash across the counter and there's an exchange of dollars, George Washington's coins, Thomas Jefferson's, whatever it is, you're passing across the table to pay for your groceries or for something you're picking up at the store. There's like a little level of actually a pain sensor that's going off in your brain. That's actually what's happening. And you feel it. You understand what's happening in that transaction and it registers in your brain. When you just use a credit card and swipe, what Scott's talking about is you don't register it in the same way. And so
which is crazy.
It's
but
crazy.
It is true. It is
makes
true.
sense.
When you see the cash go out of your wallet, it's gone. So
right.
It can be
right. So you have to be uber on top of it and disciplined and careful to make sure that it's not influencing your behaviors. And so this is like our big kind of precaution warning before we even talk about successful strategy for utilizing credit cards. We kind of have to just say this up front.
Absolutely.
You have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, am I one of these people who can have this level of discipline where I'm going to pay it off in full every month? And if not, that's okay. But hey, credit cards are not for you. And this is just something we're just going to say, and we're going to mean it. And hey, we still love you, but you should not use credit cards if that's the case. You really should not.
Absolutely. So as Lance said, you really need to be paying off your balance in full every single month. You want to make sure that you're not spending more than you can afford on those on your credit cards. Another thing, and this kind of gets into credit scores, which we're not really going to talk about on this episode, but you don't want to spend more than about 10% of your available balance because that could hurt your credit score. So if you have a $2,000 limit credit card, it's good to not spend over $200 in a given month on that card. Otherwise, it could negatively impact your credit score. And that credit card utilization rate can make up to about 30% of your overall credit score. So just think it's important to mention that. And another thing that I think is pretty important is...
So I think, we mentioned the importance of paying it off every single month in full. Scott just mentioned that. The reason for that is that the type of debt that credit card debt becomes is incredibly high interest credit card debt. And this is, if you listen to our financial playbook, that's a no-no. We do not like debt in general. Neither of us like debt, but we especially don't like high interest debt. And especially out of high interest debt, credit card debt might be some of the worst out there. So you've got to get it paid off and actually probably never go back. And so we just got to make sure that we're being disciplined when we're using credit cards, if we're going to use them at all.
Certainly. And Lance, you were kind of doing some research prior to this, to this episode, and you found an article that I thought was pretty interesting, that only 45% of people actually pay off their credit cards in full every month.
Yeah, we're talking about Americans, I think, in this article, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, basically that's saying, as far as we're concerned, 45% of Americans probably shouldn't be using credit cards. I understand that there's...
Or 55% shouldn't.
Correct. 55% should not be using credit cards.
Yeah, the majority.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's crazy when you think about it. So really, this is why credit card companies are able to offer and pay for rewards, right? Because they've got the majority of their card holders are carrying a balance that's incredibly high interest rate over time. The majority of Americans aren't, I'll just say it, aren't disciplined enough to pay it off every month. And guess who wins? The credit card companies do. However, there are 45% of Americans who are able to pull this off, and there are rewards for doing so. There are benefits. And so you might say, Scott, why no? This sounds terrible. There's a lot of bad stuff that can happen to me if I use credit card. My spending could be out of control. I rack up high interest credit card debt and all this is terrible. Like, yes, that's right. That could happen. And if that's going to happen to you, we recommend just cutting them up and never going down the credit card path. However, Scott, what are some of the benefits on why you would even entertain using credit cards, and how would you use them?
Yeah, certainly. So I like to, when I think of a credit card, I actually think of it in a positive light. Credit cards provide a lot of protection up front. If you're somebody that uses a debit card, and for whatever reason your card gets stolen, your money is taken from your checking account often, and it can take a little bit of time for that money to reappear. With a credit card, that doesn't happen. You just call your issuer. You say, hey, I had some fraud. They investigate it. You don't have to pay for that amount that was fraud. So that's incredibly powerful. There are rewards that come along with credit cards. And Lance and I have been using the Fidelity Visa signature card. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that has an unlimited 2% cash back component to it. That's 2% is significant on every purchase. That adds up over time. We stick that money into an investment account, a brokerage account, and we invest that money. So that's a huge advantage to a credit card. So there's a ton of advantages that come with having it. And also there's the insurance aspect. So if you're somebody that travels a lot, there are cards that have travel insurance built in if you book your trip with their card.
I think one of the most compelling ways to think about using credit cards, Scott, and I've heard you say this before, I've heard others say it, is to think of credit cards, in a positive light, like you said, but think of credit cards as a payment system. So anything that you're not going to be paying for already should not be bought anyway. So we're only using credit cards for purchases that you're already going to be making. Think about like groceries, or maybe, anything within your monthly budget that's already planned for on paper, any sort of monthly bills that allow you to pay for them by credit card without additional fees, anything like that, where you can pay for items that you're planning on purchasing with a credit card to gain those rewards, and then paying that off every single month in order to get the rewards. I think what we're going to see here in a little bit, we're going to run some examples. Those rewards can be significant over time. They're not little tiny insignificant rewards that are just not even worth the trouble.
No, Yeah, we're talking about thousands of dollars that this can add up to. Especially when you put it in like an investment account, or you like that's what we do. We stick the rewards into an investment account. You watch it grow, and a few years down the line, you're like, wow, I can't believe that. How much money that is.
Yeah, and just so our listeners are clear, what we're talking about in that situation is cash back rewards. So not just the travel points and all the other types of rewards you can think of, or gifts or items or whatever. We like the cash back, the guaranteed percent cash back reward cards that really have $0 annual fee. And we're actually going to go through some cards together here on this episode, some of our favorite credit cards that have been useful for us. And all of the credit cards that we like, that we're going to be recommending to you on this podcast, are $0 annual fee. There's certainly plenty of credit cards out there that are amazing, and I'm sure you could gamify them and figure out ways to get even more rewards, but you might pay $90 a year just to have the card, or $300 a year or more. And we're just not going to go down that rabbit hole for everybody. They're out there if you want to look them up, but these are just simple credit cards, $0 fee, that anybody has access to, that you can open up for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of get into that, I think number one, the first credit card that we love, I mentioned it earlier, is the Fidelity Rewards Visa Signature Card. This card gives you unlimited 2% cash back on all purchases if redeemed for investment savings. So that could be towards your retirement account, towards an HSA, a brokerage, a 529. We obviously would highly recommend buying those Fidelity Zero funds that we mentioned in the last podcast that have zero expense ratio. You can kind of watch your money grow over time, and it'll add up to a significant amount.
Yeah, this card actually, Scott, I just want to say real quick on the Fidelity Rewards card, this is my favorite card in my wallet. So this is my green Visa card. I know that I'm getting 2% cash back on every single purchase, whether I make it for my work as an expense that I'm going to get reimbursed for and still get the benefit and the reward of this, or whether I'm using it for personal expenses. 2% cash back to my Fidelity account, and then I can choose actually to invest it, or I can choose to actually just move that cash into my checking account, and it's just additional cash flow for the month, which is pretty nice. So I'm a huge fan of the Fidelity Rewards Visa Signature Card, and we're going to link to all these credit cards on our show notes. We should say that. So definitely look in the show notes or on our website, dollarsandhops.com, for all these cards that we're going to mention. Scott, what's the next card we're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next card is the Citi Double Cash card. I like this one slightly less than the Visa Signature Card from Fidelity, but it's also 2% cash back. You get 1% as you buy, 1% as you pay. There's no caps, no annual fees. It's very simple, cut and dry. And you know, that 2% can be pretty significant for the average household.
So if we're talking about 2% cash back, Scott, what does that look like actually, like in real dollars?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty cool to look at this. So like you look at the average household, maybe let's just say they spend about $4,000 a month in expenses, groceries, just monthly expenses. They put $4,000 on their credit card instead of spending cash for whatever it is. If you were to get the rewards from that $4,000, so the 2% on that $4,000 on an annual basis, it adds up to about $960. If you were to stick that into a Fidelity Zero fund, earn, let's say 8.5% interest, which is a pretty conservative interest rate, over 10 years, you're going to end up with about $17,600. If you did that for 30 years, you'd end up with an extra $140,000. So that's how powerful this 2% could be. I think that the average family is probably, it could be anywhere from, $2,000 all the way up to $10,000, $15,000 in monthly expenses. But let's just say it's 4. I mean, having an extra $140,000 in your pocket after 30 years is pretty powerful.
Right. I mean, that's real money. And I think what this example illustrates also is the power of compound interest. And There's a lot to dive into and explain about compound interest. We're not going to do that this episode. However, we will have a future episode where we really focus in on compound interest. What is it? How does it work? But for now, what we want you to see is that this is not pennies we're talking about. We're talking about, roughly $1,000 a year just for using a basic $0 annual fee credit card for your normal expenses, whether it's $4,000 or $2,000 or whatever your normal expenses are. In this example, $4,000 a month compounded over time, growing with the market, investing how we are telling you and teaching you to invest. That's $18,000 after 10 years or $140,000 after 30 years. That's real money. So this is not something to just swipe away and just forget about, but something to really analyze and see if you can harness the power of these credit card rewards and compound interest, compound growth.
Yeah, no doubt. And to get to the next credit card that we kind of mentioned here, so the Chase Amazon Rewards Visa. This is for all the people that love Amazon, that have an addiction like I do to Amazon,
and myself as well. Yes.
And
we both have this card, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So this one is for non-Prime customers, non-Amazon Prime customers. You get 3% cash back on Amazon and Whole Foods purchases, 2% at restaurants, gas and drugstores, 1% on all other purchases. For Prime customers, everything's the same except for you get 5% cash back on all of your Amazon purchases. There's no annual fee. There's no earnings cap. There's no foreign transaction fees. So anytime I'm traveling abroad, this is the card I use. There's no foreign transaction fees. But the main thing that I use this for is Amazon. I just have it linked to my Amazon account.
Same.
Every Amazon purchase is done with this card. I don't use it for pretty much anything else unless I'm traveling out of the country. You set it and you forget it. It's like the easiest card in the world to use. I never use it except for when I'm on Amazon. So I think 5%, you can't beat that, especially with Amazon prices.
Agreed. And I'll say, we don't really shop at Whole Foods a whole lot because we are cheap, and I love me some Aldi. And also, shout out to the latest monthly budget hack that we've been utilizing has been Instacart Aldi, which is still cheaper than like most grocery stores, and it gets delivered to your doorstep. So that's been amazing. But when we do go to Whole Foods to pick up, maybe we're in the neighborhood of a local Whole Foods and we just have to grab something real quick. It's great to use the Amazon Rewards Visa card, knowing you're going to get 5% cash back on all your purchases there as well, because of course Amazon owns Whole Foods. So it's just something to point out, another benefit to this card.
Yep, no doubt. And this last card that we're going to mention is the Target Red Card. This one's a little different in how they set everything up. It's basically, there's no annual fee, but it's 5% off. So 5% off your purchases at Target, online, and in-store. Also 5% off at Starbucks. I think that's a little random, but I guess because there's like Starbucks in the Target sometimes.
Yeah, Starbucks in Target. There's some kind of like maybe partnership there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anything about this card. Scott threw this one on there. It looks interesting. I will say I tried to do everything I can to keep Carolyn, my wife, out of Target because it seems to be a big red hole for anybody who walks into that place.
Agreed.
Especially moms. But they do have great prices on diapers. I know that I've compared prices and they beat Costco on diapers.
I think the diapers are a loss leader. They're just trying to get the women in to buy the diapers, and then they're going to buy like the Magnolia Farms, whatever it is.
You heard it here first. That is so true.
What woman walks into a Target and doesn't spend $200? I mean, let's be honest.
It's true. That's why this card, maybe I should look at this card. I don't know, man. You're maybe selling me on it. So that's all we have. Those are our top 4 credit cards with 0 annual fee that we think give you the best bang for your buck on cash back earned, percent cash back earned on every purchase. And in many of these cases, in fact, I think maybe all of them, uncapped cash back earned, which is really crucial when you take into account the compound growth interest that could be at play, depending on what you do with that cash. What we have next are some questions that need answers. Scott, we got a question from a listener. I want to go ahead and read this to you. I'm looking to purchase a home within the next 6 months, this listener writes. My credit score is currently 660. I don't know why it's so low, and I always pay my bills on time. What things can I do to get my credit score up to ensure that I get the best possible interest rate when I go to buy a home? Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I think that the listener writing in probably doesn't, it sounds like they're paying their bills on time, which is great. But there could be some underlying factors as to why the credit score is only a 660. So I like this question. I think the first thing that this listener should do is establish an account with Credit Karma, creditkarma.com, KARMA.com. This allows you to track your credit score on a monthly basis. It also shows you all of the accounts that you have open. And if you see anything that's weird under your Credit Karma account, it might make sense to pull an actual copy of your credit report. You can do this for free at annualcreditreport.com. And I think the main thing is to get to get your credit score up, you want to make sure you're paying all your bills on time. That makes up about 35% of your overall score, just paying your bills on time. It sounds like this listener's doing a great job of that. The next thing I'd say is to make sure that you're using less than 10% or 10% or less of your revolving credit limits. So I think I mentioned this earlier in the episode. If you've got $5,000 in credit available to you, let's say under a credit card, you want to make sure that you're not using more than $500 of that in any given month. If you do, it can negatively impact your credit score, especially if you go over about 35% of credit utilization. So make sure you use less than 10% of the revolving credit limit, and don't open any additional accounts between now and the time that you want to take out the mortgage. So for the next 6 months, don't open any additional credit accounts. If you do, it'll probably negatively impact your credit score, and that's obviously what you're trying to not have happen.
So, Scott, I got a question for you. What would be like considered a good credit score when you're trying to purchase a home?
Yeah, so I would say most lenders think of a good credit score as 740-ish or more is generally considered pretty good. I think that most people fall into that range of anywhere between 700 and 750 is pretty standard. It goes all the way up to 850 on the credit scale. So, but usually if you're in that middle 700 range, that's pretty good, and that's what lenders want to see. And with that, we had one more question. This one's for Lance. This one says, I wanted to get your thoughts on Bitcoin. Is it okay to take a portion of my investments and invest it in Bitcoin? If so, what percentage of my overall portfolio should I invest? My head's about to explode. Lance, take it.
All right. So for those of you who don't know what Bitcoin is, it is cryptocurrency. So it's actually not even based on the US dollar currency system or any world nation currency system at all. And it was developed using blockchain technology, which is kind of confusing, but basically it tries to be a free currency, meaning free of any government control, and the same type of a currency that could be used across the globe. And it really has, this might be an unpopular opinion, it's failed, and it has not done that, and it has not taken off like it was hoped that it might. And so what it has turned into is a completely speculative play that I most certainly do not recommend. I think you would have I'm not kidding, I think you would have a better shot and probably maybe more fun just going and blowing whatever money you were wanting to put into Bitcoin on literally anything, or even going to Vegas and putting it on red, or playing blackjack with every penny of that dollar until it's gone and it goes to the casinos. And then at least you can say, well, I had a crazy time in Vegas. I mean, literally, I think it's such a terrible, it's not an investment. Let me just say it that way. it's not an investment.
I agree. It's not an
It's a
investment.
speculative play that is literally like playing a what am I trying to say? Slot machine. It's something like that. So no, I don't think you should do it. No, I don't recommend doing it. If you feel like you just have to, and you're going to miss out on something, which you're not, but if you feel like that, you should limit it to like, no, you shouldn't do it. That's what I'm going to say. You shouldn't do it.
I think if you do, I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it. I think it's a bad move if you do it, but don't take anything that you would be losing sleep over at night and invest it in Bitcoin. Because like Lance said, it's really not an investment. There's nothing productive coming out of it. When you invest in a stock, there's companies behind that are producing a good or service to greater their customer base.
Which generates a profit.
Exactly.
More times than not.
Bitcoin is just this imaginary thing that exists out there that has value as long as people think it has value. So it's worth whatever people think it's worth. Right. So it's not really an investment, as Lance said.
I will say in my own personal portfolio, I have a limit on single stocks and what I allow myself to kind of play around with on the side. And I typically limit that to about like 5%. I don't really go over that. So if I got a couple companies out there that I think are worth investing in, 95% of my portfolio is in index funds, and then I can play around with that 5% with maybe one or two or maybe even three companies that I think really have something special for the long term that I'm willing to speculate on. But that's the extent of my speculation. I'm not dipping into Bitcoin or alpaca farms out in Nevada or anything like that either. So that's just or avocado. I don't know. Listen, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there. Stick to the basics and stick to what's been proven.
Yeah, no doubt. And with that, Lance, I think to follow that up, let's get into the Hops Showdown portion of the pod. So I'm going to get into my beer first. I think you told me before we started recording that I needed to rate mine before you rated yours. I think we had... Oh, you're first. You're first. Okay. All right.
I think I'm first this week. Yeah, I'm first. And this beer, it's a local beer. So I love kind of giving a shout out to our local peeps here in the Charleston area. Free House Brewery out of North Charleston, South Carolina. This is the Green Door IPA. I love IPAs, so it is delicious. And this one has organic hops, so special kudos, bonus points for the Green Door IPA. It was definitely citrusy, and the can said grassy and herbal. I think I would agree with that. It kind of had this kind of earthy tone to it, but it was also light. And I'm pretty hard grader. I'm a pretty hard grader on my IPAs, so I liked this one. It was good, but I'm gonna give it maybe the first decimal grade we've ever had. I'm going to give it an 89.5.
89.5. All right. So again, I was drinking the 51 Rye from Monument City Brewing Company out of Baltimore, Maryland. This is an India Pale Ale. I'll say it was a little bitter to start, but I definitely started tasting the notes of caramel and citrus as I went on. Every sip it got better. And there was a very, very, very nice balance of flavors. I would say the first quarter of the beer I didn't love. Wow. And the last 3/4 of it I absolutely love. So it was kind of one of those that as you sip on it, it gets better. With that, I'll give it a solid 91, and I'll take down this Hops Showdown.
Monument City pulling in the win. Gotta love it.
No doubt. So with that, we're going to leave you with our action step today. Do you take advantage of credit cards? Do you have the discipline to pay them off in full every single month? Are you in that 45% that pays them off every single month? If you are, you're probably somebody that can take advantage of all of these different benefits that we mentioned during this podcast. Take a look at the no annual fee cards that we've mentioned to help optimize your personal finances.
This is Lance.
This is Scott.
Live and give on less than you make and invest the difference. Dollars and Hops out.
You have been listening to the Dollars and Hops podcast. Optimizing your financial future starts with taking action today. Got a question? Shoot us an email at questions@dollarsandhops.com, and the guys will tackle it on a future episode. Visit our website, dollarsandhops.com, for show notes and the craft brew lineup for each episode. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Thanks for listening.